Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this module on optimising team performance. I hope you've had a good week so far, and I hope that you've had a chance to put into practice some of the things that we've talked about, particularly last time in relation to influencing skills and understanding that influence is more than just using your own particular approach, your favourite approach, which you would have picked up from your influencing capabilities profile. So welcome to the program. We've got a lot to cover in this hour, so please enjoy, and if you feel that you've got any comment or question that you'd like to make, you know what to do. I think at this stage you can go over to the question box and type in comments. It doesn't have to be a question, it might be an observation, or it could be some clarification, or it could be a question that you want to ask me directly. And what I'll do is I'll make sure that I have a good look at that question box, and at different times throughout the presentation I'll attempt to answer those questions as they come. But if you forget and at the end of the presentation you wish you'd asked me a question, you've got me on email, so just send me an email and I'm more than happy to try and respond to that as well. Alright, so let's get underway and look at this topic. Now, my argument is, and I think it's a fair argument, is that your job is pretty much to get the best out of each member of your team. So your job is to try to maximise the potential of the individuals and the team so that you can get the work done that you need to in local government. And it's not always an easy thing to do, I accept that, and it's not always about getting everybody to be performing at 100%, whatever that might mean. But it might be just to get people to perform from a 50 to a 60%, or even a 50 to a 55%. It's always about trying to challenge and get new, new growth from the people that you work with. So hopefully what I'm going to share with you this afternoon will help you in the local government environment. Okay, so there's three things that I basically want to cover during this session. I want to talk about the barriers to a conversation culture, and I guess I'm saying that I believe that conversations are really the vehicle that you should be using in order to improve the performance of the people in your team. There's not many other ways you can do it, quite frankly, and getting good at having productive conversations with people is really important. So we'll look at some of the barriers around that, and there's some very real barriers, both personal, physical and organisational barriers. We'll look at a framework which I put together called the 5 Conversations Framework, and essentially it's a framework that will assist you to have some of the more important conversations that you need to with your colleagues. And we'll also look at another 5 more conversations. And so as I'm going through 10 conversations, you might like to think, well, which of those conversations do I need to be doing more of in order to optimise the performance of my team members? So essentially you can see that this session is very much on having the conversation. And let me say that before I go any further, when I talk about conversations, I'm not necessarily talking about the hard conversations. It could be about encouraging people. It could be about giving people some vision. And it could be about, some sort of a support conversation, or delegation could be considered as a conversation. So let's not think it's all about the unpleasant conversations. Nevertheless, we need to have those. All right, here's some sobering statistics, and I'll just put it all up first so that you can have a read through. Whoop, I went too far. Let's go back. All right, so this is important. Have a think about some of this information, and this comes from some reputable research. And for example, 79% of people, or 79% of organisations worldwide, actually struggle to engage and retain their employees. So they're having real problems out there. I don't think it's a huge issue for local government, and it probably very much depends on what region you're in. But nevertheless, I think, having a high turnover can be a significant problem. But more important than that is that people who choose to stay but don't engage. And that's the issue that I really want to address in this session. 86% of organisations believe that they don't have an adequate leadership pipeline to address these problems. So people don't think they've got the necessary leadership capabilities to address the issues of engagement. 90% of leaders rely on their own ideas rather than seeking involvement from their own team. And worse still, 89% of leaders fail to listen or respond to interpersonal cues from those they interact with. So really, I guess I'm hoping that you've got the idea by now that it's not all about you, it's not all about your ideas, it's all about getting others engaged in the conversation. Disturbingly, only 5% of leaders are effective at building trust in their interactions with team members. And as we looked at previously, trust is critical. If you're not being trusted, if you don't have a sense of trust with other people, then all the techniques in the world are not going to work for you. So being trustworthy is critically important. So how do you become trustworthy? Well, the very easiest way is to do what you say you're going to do. Walk the talk, in other words. And if you do that, then people will start to believe that your word means something. 60% of employees felt that their self-esteem was dented by their leader at work. These people would rather do almost anything else than sit through a performance conversation with their boss. Although they did acknowledge that a good boss with excellent interaction skills would enhance their productivity as much as 60%. So you can see that it will make all the difference in the world if we can improve our capacity to interact. 79% of people, of employees who quit their jobs, cited a lack of appreciation as the key reason for leaving. So the business of saying thank you, I appreciate what you've done. You've done some great things here, thank you. All of those things are critically important and underestimated. You can see that they're important to the people that are being surveyed. 65% of North Americans report that they didn't receive any recognition in the previous year. Now, they may well have but not recognised as recognition, but nevertheless, 65% of people believe that they didn't receive any recognition. That's an indictment on the leadership, where they feel perhaps that it's not their place to recognise or praise their team members. It actually is. So I guess what I'm trying to do by painting these pictures is say, look, we've got a bit of an issue here around getting the best out of people and engaging people. And I just want to demonstrate that beyond local government, we've got some serious issues around engaging people in their work. So it's not unique to local government, if you like. So let's just talk about conversation for a moment. Now, there's a couple of interesting things about conversations. I actually have said in one of my previous books, Conversations at Work, which I co-authored with Aubrey Warren, we actually made the claim that organisations are conversations. And what I mean by that is if you think about your local government environment, it really is, take away the buildings and infrastructure and so forth, it really is a bunch of people conversing about a range of matters, ongoing, day to day, week to week, month to month. There are hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of conversations going on each day. These conversations occur in the lunchroom, they occur outdoors, they occur in the car, they occur in the boardroom, they occur in the council chambers, they occur everywhere. So it's fair to say that organisations are a series of conversations. And that's the point I want to make. So really, if organisations are really a series of conversations between people that can occur over a period of time, some of the conversations are long, some of the conversations are short, some of the conversations are boring, some of the conversations are interesting, some of the conversations are structured, some of the conversations are meandering, the conversations are relentless. So the question then for you in local government is this: are the conversations of a high enough quality in order to get the best from other people? That's the question that I pose to you. A lot of our conversations, of course, in the workplace are very much around tasks, projects, getting things done for the community, and so they should be. I'm not suggesting for a minute that we should shortchange our task-based conversations. However, it leaves very little room for the people-focused conversations. And so what we tend to do is if we've got people issues, we'll tend to do it via email instead of doing it face-to-face in the conversation environment. So have a think about that. People will often say to me, and I'm sure you've heard this many, many times, the concept of the art of conversation, that there's some great art form to it. I actually don't think there is, and the reason I say that is that you and I are used to having hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands and millions of conversations. We get a lot of practice in having conversations. I'm not too sure that it is an art form. In fact, I think that there are some conversations that are more difficult than others, and some of those, of course, are the performance management conversations. Don't doubt for a minute a skill level is needed in those areas. But let's face it, 90% of the conversations we have probably aren't really an art form. So I think sometimes we hide behind that and we think that we're really not really ready to have these conversations because we're not very good at it, or it takes a high level of skill and it's a skill level that I don't have. So we hear that all the time and we may even think it. So we need to sort of consider that. I guess the point is, I wonder whether we've lost the need for conversations. It's an interesting question, isn't it? Because we're obviously interacting more and more via electronic media. I guess we're doing this here today in this broadcast. We send text messages instead of conversations. Sometimes we have a conversation via text. We send emails when we should be having a conversation. So I wonder whether we are having less conversations or whether we've lost the need for the face-to-face conversation. I hope not, and I don't think so, because I'm believing that the face-to-face conversation is the most powerful form of communication when we're trying to get the best from other people. You send someone an email and it's not likely to be as effective as it would be face-to-face if it's about people development. I spoke to a manager in local government the other day in one of my jobs and one of my consulting jobs, and I said to this person, or that person said to me, a manager, they said, you know what, I don't have time for conversations. And I thought to myself, I wonder what he means by that. And in fact, I asked, I said, what do you mean you don't have time for conversations? He said, well, I've got too much work to do. I don't have time to be sitting around having conversations with my team members. And so, of course, what he was doing was disconnecting the conversation to his work as a leader. He didn't see having conversations as part of the work. And I challenged him and I said, well, surely you have conversations with people. He said, oh, yeah, work-related, absolutely, yes, I do. Each day, of course, we've got to get the product, or, not the product, we've got to get the job done for the community. And so, he admitted in the end that he did have a lot of conversations. It's just that they weren't people-focused conversations. They were very task-focused conversations. There are two gentlemen who have written a number of good books and have written some nice endorsements for my books, Kuzner and Posner. Barry Posner and James Kuzner actually make the comment in one of their books. And one of their books is called Credibility, which probably speaks for itself, how to gain credibility. In that book, they make a very nice statement. They say that leadership is a conversation. I love that. Leadership is a conversation. Leadership is a relationship. So my question is, if leadership is a relationship, and I'm not talking about a personal relationship, of course, I'm talking about a working relationship, a constructive working relationship. So if leadership is a relationship, then my question to Kuzner and Posner is this: how do we build relationships? And the answer, of course, is one conversation at a time. That's how we build any form of relationship with any person, is one conversation at a time. So if we really argue that it's about building good, constructive working relationships, then frankly we have no choice but to have these conversations with people on a regular basis. So conversations are the vehicle by which you can build your leadership capabilities. So what I want to do now is go through the barriers to communication, and particularly barriers around having conversations. And I want to share with you 9. I'm sure there are more than 9. And when I share these with you, they're not necessarily in any order, so don't think the first one means, that I consider them to be the most critical barrier. I guess when I'm going through these 9, I want you to be thinking about yourself and think about which of these barriers are the most challenging for you in local government. Because if you can identify what they are, then perhaps you might be in a position where you can do something about it. Because if you don't do something about it, those barriers are likely to remain. So let's have a look at barrier number 1, or the first barrier that I've picked here. It'll come up in your screen shortly. Here we go. Okay. So one of the barriers would be the inattention during conversations. Now, all of us do this. When somebody's communicating with us, we're often multitasking, aren't we? We're sending out an email while somebody's standing at the doorway. And we'll often say to that person, look, just keep talking, I'm listening to you, I've just got to finish this email off. So we're actually trying to do 2 things, or multitasking. We're trying to send out an email, and we're also trying to show some degree of empathy with the person who's trying to communicate something to us at the door of our office, or if it's an open plan environment, the same thing. Actually, what that does is it's not doing justice to the email or the person at the door. The latest research is demonstrating that we are not very good at multitasking, that we are very poor at it, and that the most effective thing that we can do is concentrate on one job or one task at a time. So, so the key thing is to stop doing the email and give the person 100% attention, or to say to the person at the doorway, look, I've got to finish this email, it's critically important, let me do this, and as soon as I finish this, I'll come over to you and we'll talk about what it is that you want to talk about. So that becomes critically important. The other inattentiveness is, of course, when people are talking to us, we're often off thinking about something else. And that's because our brains work much, much faster than the rate of speech. And that's probably what's happening to you right now. While I'm talking, you're off thinking about something else. So that's something we've got to be very mindful of. And the more we can give people 100% attention, the better the conversation will go, the better our listening will be, and the better everybody else will be as a result of that. Another barrier that we have is, thank you, Beck. Beck's just said I'm listening. Thank you, Beck. So it's nice to know somebody's listening. Guys, if you've got questions or comments, don't forget, please put them in the question box, and I'm more than happy to deal with them. So thank you. What about restrictive information channels? Have a think about your boss. Have a think about you. Have a think about your local government environment. How often have you heard the saying where people say, if you don't get told, no news is good news, or you'll get told on a need-to-know basis? How often have you heard those? Well, of course, it's very common, isn't it, in local government? What we're really saying is that we won't tell you anything unless we feel it's important that you know. This is what we call a restricted information channel. And by restricting information channels, we're restricting the information that the person has to act upon it. So I don't think you should be doing that. I think when you're in doubt, you should be sharing with people what the information is. If you don't know, share it. Just say, I don't know the answer to that. My boss hasn't told me. I'll check for you. And of course, the next step is to go and check. It's really important that you do that. So I think that it's based on a really dangerous premise, and that is that employees can't be trusted with information. That's why we restrict it, which is really scary. You know, it might be because they'll go to the local newspaper, or they'll go to the union, or they will say something in the community, and we can't afford to have that. So therefore what we'll do is we'll make sure that we restrict the information channels. Not good. So talk to people, give people the broad breadth of information, and people will appreciate that very much. All right, well, what's the third barrier? And as I said, these are not necessarily in any order. The third barrier, and we've talked about this, in fact, we've spent a whole unit on this, and this is feedback. The third barrier is where we don't give people any feedback at all, insufficient feedback or no feedback. Now, I can recall, and this local government organisation will remain nameless, but I do recall, and this happened a few years ago, but nevertheless, I do recall that we had somebody who had been working in a local government organisation for 6 months, and they had been straight out of school. So in other words, this was their first job. And I actually said to them casually, how are you settling in? Which is a fair question for someone that's only been there for 6 months in their first job. And they said to me, I don't know. And I said, well, why don't you know? And they said, well, no one's given me any feedback. And I said to this person, because I knew their boss reasonably well, and I said, would you like me to go and talk to your boss and ask them very tactfully if they could sit down and give you some feedback? And she said, oh, that'd be fantastic. So off I trotted and to the boss's office, and he was looking at me over his half-moon glasses behind the big desk. And I said to him, and let's call the person Jenny, and I said, you know, Jenny started 6 months ago in your department, and she's not received any feedback, and I'm just wondering if it would be possible for you to give her a little bit of feedback to let her know how she settled in. And there was a bit of a pause. I could see that the manager was thinking, and he said to me, and he shook his head while he was saying it, oh no, I couldn't do that. And I was thinking to myself, wow, what's going on here? You know, is there some conflict of interest? Are they having an affair? What could possibly be the reason that this manager, who's a reasonably confident person, wouldn't be prepared to sit down and give this person some feedback on how they've settled in? So I said, do you mind if I ask why? And he said, yeah, very simple, Tim. He said, if I give feedback to her, I've got to give feedback to everyone. I was rendered speechless. I really didn't know what to say to that, but please don't fall into that trap. Give people feedback regularly. That's why we spent a whole unit on Unit 1 on that. And I hope, by the way, you're still giving your 3 bits of feedback each day. Okay, number 4 barrier is that we may have a culture of not asking questions. So we have a situation where if you have a tertiary qualification or a trade or whatever, you've been taught really to learn how to answer questions. Essentially, that's what a professional does. They're given a dilemma or a problem, and the job of the professional is to sort it out. In other words, to answer a difficult question. But I would suggest to you that in your role as a leader, you have a responsibility now to ask questions, not answer them. So in other words, you need to be asking thought-provoking questions that precipitate, thought-provoking responses, and to basically create a dialogue. So if you look at people who are very good at conversations, one of the things that they do, and you see it all the time, is that the person asks the other person lots and lots and lots of questions, and that builds up obviously people have to answer that, and then you create a dialogue between two people. So that's a barrier, that people don't feel comfortable asking questions. One of the best questions you can ask, incidentally, of a person is, do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions so that I understand the situation? That's a question. And who's going to say no to that? And if they say yes, then you can feel quite comfortable then asking a series of questions as a result of that question. Number 5, too much formality. If you're working in an open office environment, I know many of you are, then you probably realise that you've got to go and have your private conversations when you book the meeting room. But those of you who perhaps have your own office, be careful, it's a trap. Too many conversations in your office are not a good thing, because what happens is it adds a degree of formality. You, of course, feel very comfortable in your own office, and it's not all about you, remember, it's all about the other person. And really, sometimes having conversations in your office doesn't actually produce a great dialogue. So my suggestion is to go to a coffee shop if there's one near you. Some of the best conversations that you'll have, both personally and work-wise, will be in neutral places like coffee shops where you can really feel relaxed, and that's important. So that's a barrier, too much formality. And often that's what happens with the job. This is what happens with the performance review. It's often done in the boss's office at the boss's time, and usually the boss calls all the shots. No wonder the employee clams up and doesn't want to talk. All right, barrier number 6. Yes, I had to mention it, and I am mentioning it, and here it comes up on your screen now, is an over-reliance on email. Now, can I ask you a question? How many hours, and I'm assuming it is hours, do you spend dealing with email each day? I think you would be amazed. Do you know that the average person spends 2.5 hours a day on email? You might say, well, I'm obviously not average. I'm spending more time on email than 2.5 hours. Other people may say, well, I don't spend that long on it. But what happens is that, and please don't get me wrong, I think email is a wonderful tool, and clearly your local government environment would not work if we got rid of emails tomorrow. Heaven forbid. You wonder how we survived without emails, pre-emails in local government, don't you? But anyway, the point is that often we're sending emails there where we really should be having a conversation or picking up the phone. And I would encourage you, before you start firing off emails left, right and centre, is to ask yourself the question, are we, or can we basically do this another way? Is it a conversation? We've got somebody here who's made a comment. Very good. I have too many emails. We all do. And I think it's up to all of us to take a responsibility to reduce the amount of emails we send and receive, and not copy in every Tom, Dick and Harry every time we send an email off to sort of cover our bases. So have the conversation rather than send an email can be very, very useful. And start to train your people to do the same thing as well. It can be very powerful. All right, number 7. We've got 2 more to go after this. Number 7, a lack of role models. Now, it is true to say that if the senior team, so if your directors or executive team or ELT or whatever you call it in your local government environment, if those people, the CEO and the ELT, and you may be part of that, but if they're not having conversations, guess what? The whole organisation suffers. So it starts at the top and works its way down, and that's really, really important. I remember working with a CEO, and this was outside local government, by the way, but I was working with a CEO who actually managed 14, or does manage 14,000 employees, right? So it's a pretty significant role. And it was just before Christmas, and I was coaching all of his senior team plus himself, so I was doing executive coaching with the team, and I was getting some fairly negative feedback about the CEO. The feedback was that the CEO is not out and about enough, or is not seen enough, which is fairly familiar. I'm sure you've heard that, and I'm sure you feel that at times. And I suggested to him that he have a conversation with each of his senior team. By the way, an organisation that size, he had something like 18 on his senior team. And I said, it's a good idea to do that. And he said to me, well, I intend to do that, Tim, after Christmas. And I said, well, really, you can't afford that time. You probably need to do this before you break for Christmas. And to his credit, he called in his personal assistant, and he cleared his diary for the next 2 days and basically had a series of short, sharp, focused conversations with each of his senior team. And you know what? That completely changed the whole dynamic, the whole perspective. And not only that, each of those team members went out and started having regular conversations with each of their team members. And their team members started doing the same thing. So just by changing behaviour, that CEO was able to change it, to create a culture of conversation in their workplace. Number 8, let's not talk about this because it might be opening a can of worms. So the fear of emotion is often a reason why we don't have conversations. We are worried about opening a can of worms. So we decide to shut up and say nothing, hoping, of course, that the behaviour or whatever it is will change. And you know what? It doesn't change. We have to actually talk about it. So I think it's very important that we have the difficult conversations with people in private, and to work up the courage to do that. I know it's not easy, but it is important, and you will benefit enormously from doing that. So the fear of emotion, or not wanting to create a problem. It is interesting that I was working in a well-known orchestra in Australia, and 2 people who shared a music stand in this orchestra, both in rehearsal and on stage, hadn't spoken to each other for 10 years, which I find absolutely amazing. And I said to one of them, well, how do you communicate if you don't speak to each other? You know, there are artistic things. How do you do that? And they said, well, we pass notes to each other. I said, really, what do you do at the end of your performance when you're celebrating in the bar? One of them said, well, I sit at one end of the bar and they sit at the other. I said, how long? I said, it's been going for a year. It's been going for 10 years. How long do you anticipate it to continue? And he said, well, as long as it takes. Anyway, I convinced one of them to sit down and have a conversation with the other person. And the fear of opening a can of worms was the very thing that was stopping them having this conversation. So I thought, isn't that amazing? And it really was nothing. It was absolutely nothing. And that was a decade ago. Number 9, the final one in the list. As I said before, there's probably others, but number 9 is the office layout. Now, I know because I've worked in many local government organisations, many local government authorities are open office in lots of places, particularly in the administration area. And one of the reasons that we've moved towards the open office, of course, is so that we can give people an opportunity to break down the barriers and talk to each other. But what we've found is it actually creates barriers because people don't readily raise things because they're worried about the conversation being overheard by other people. So they tend to just be very, very quiet or don't say anything, and or send an email, which is even worse. So open office environments have got something to be said for the ability to have open conversations. Now, I accept that you can't do much about this, but if you can, you need to be able to find a place and a time, book a room or whatever, so that you can have your conversations and not use the open environment as an excuse not to be having conversations. So book a room, get in early and create, and then so you have your conversation away from the workplace. Otherwise, what happens is that you start making excuses for the barriers, which in this case is no privacy. All right, so they're the 9 they're the 9 barriers to conversations that could get in the way. So what I want to do now is move the conversation on to talk about these 10 conversations that I mentioned at the beginning. So what sort of conversations can you have with people, and what will work and what won't work? Well, one of the processes that I use is called the 5 Conversations Framework. It's a framework that I designed, and initially I designed it as a replacement for the performance review. But I know in local government environments it's very difficult, if not impossible, to be getting rid of the performance review. So what I do suggest is that people actually apply this framework to enable a better performance review conversation. So this is something that goes on throughout the course of a year, doesn't ever finish. And you'll notice that in the left-hand side you've got the months of the year. So we've got 5 months. In the second column we've got the topics that people will talk about. So you'll notice that in month 1 we've got a climate review, 2, strengths and talents, 3, operations for growth, 4, learning and development, and 5, innovation and continuous improvement. And then the column in the middle is really the content of the conversation. All right. So the climate review is very much around job satisfaction, morale, and communication. The strengths and talents conversation is about how we can build on people's innate talents in the work they're doing and in the work that they may be doing in the future. Opportunities for growth are looking for those areas of weakness that can be built upon. Learning and development is, how can we sponsor people's growth and development in role? And innovation and continuous improvement is around having conversations about improving the efficiency and the effectiveness of the local government environment. All right, so each of those conversations has a very clear rationale or reason. And so it's very important that all of those conversations are had. Now, you may not want to take it on in a structured way, which is how some other organisations have done it. But nevertheless, you can use them as a template to actually create more conversations. So let's say, for example, you've got a difficult person who clearly is not showing any engagement in their work, and you're really at a loss to know what to do about it. Well, why not book a room, sit down with them, and the first question that might come out of your mind is to say something like this. I'd be actually very interested to know, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being high, 1 being low, what your current level of job satisfaction is. That's my question. And the person will have to think about that, of course. And as you know, it's very easy to answer questions. And let's say that they say to you that my job satisfaction currently is a 4. Then your next question will be, could you tell me why you've rated it a 4? And this, of course, opens up a doorway to talk about their job satisfaction. You may then move on to say, okay, what could I do, if anything, to perhaps improve that and make that a 7? How can I improve or help you improve your own job satisfaction? So you can see that it's a very constructive conversation, and it can be very, very useful. Strengths and talents are really all about building on people's innate talents. Instead of us, and I see this a lot in local government, we are very nitpicking. We're looking for things that are going wrong. We're looking for chinks in the armour. We're looking for, poor performance. But perhaps before we go there, it might be a good idea to look at what people are good at. And some of you might be sitting there going, well, you don't know so-and-so. They haven't demonstrated to me they're good at anything. Well, they probably are. It's probably you just haven't looked hard enough, because really there's always something that people are good at and something they enjoy doing. In fact, there's a very high correlation between what people enjoy and what they're good at. So a good way to start that conversation might be to ask the question, what part of your current role do you enjoy most? Now, there must be something, obviously, that they enjoy more than anything else. And then you can then say, tell me more, or why did you say that, and what does that mean? And then I think the question then becomes one of how can we use that innate talent, if possible, for your current or future job. It's not always possible, I might say, but it could be. So you can see that it's quite a positive conversation around strengths and talents. In month 3, and I'm suggesting we have one of these conversations every month, and that these conversations last for 10 to 15 minutes. They don't have to last any longer, despite what people might think. So a long conversation is not necessarily a productive conversation, and equally a short conversation can be a very productive conversation. So we move on to month 3, and month 3 is really around opportunities for growth. And I like people to come prepared for that. In fact, I like them to come prepared for all of these conversations. So I might ask them to think about that before we meet, so that they're not just sitting there like a stunned mullet. When I ask them what I think they should be working on, they've actually told me from their perspective what they see as critically important. Innovation and continuous improvement is the next conversation, and this is about the ways and means of making the organisation more efficient and effective, and the ideas that go with that. So how do we cut red tape? How do we increase performance? How do we increase safety? How do we increase interpersonal harmony? break down the silos, which are very, very commonplace in local government. How do we actually get rid of silo mentality? I'm sure if we did that, local governments would work extremely well immediately. So I can commend to you the 5 Conversations framework as an outstanding framework. It works extremely well. You can do it formally or, of course, informally, but at least you've got some ideas there, and you'll get a copy of these slides, of course, at the end of this, as I said before. So that is a very useful framework. Here are 5 more conversations you need to think about and consider weaving into your day-to-day activities. And the beautiful thing about this Lunch and Learn is it's Friday afternoon, it's 2:15, we'll be finishing in about 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. And you may be having lunch now, but the good news is that you've got a couple of hours before you knock off for work to go and practice some of these conversations before the end of the day. And what better time to do that than this afternoon? So what are we talking about? What are these 5 more conversations? One of the conversations that you should be indulging in on a regular basis is the coaching conversation. The coaching conversation, you might note, is a 2-way conversation. This is a conversation where you work with the other person, and this would be an involved conversation because it's a project or a difficult task. And you work through this as a dialogue where there's a genuine conversation around the coaching. So coaching can be a conversation. It's not normally, or shouldn't be, at least, a directive, a one-way kind of conversation. Well, if it's one way, it's not a conversation, that's a monologue. It should be a dialogue between 2 people. So have a coaching conversation with people. Many of you in this broadcast have got extremely good technical capabilities. Why aren't you sharing that, or why can't you share that more than you are currently doing with the people around you in your team? There's no excuse, because remember, it's about getting the best out of the people that you lead. Another conversation, which probably isn't going to be completely prevalent to all of you, is the mentoring conversation. This is the conversation which is slightly different from coaching, where you're basically imparting career advice. So if you've been around the ridges a little bit and you know the local government environment inside out and back to front, most of your career was in local government, you may be called upon informally to mentor one of your team members on career development. It's just that you might be kind of roped into that. So that's a good thing. It's a very rewarding experience to be asked to be somebody's mentor. But what it basically means is that you can have a conversation on careers with somebody who perhaps is less experienced in the workplace, and can be an enormously rewarding experience. Number 3, or a third conversation. Again, just like the coaching conversation, the delegation conversation might not really seem like a conversation, but for something that's reasonably involved, I would expect that it would be a conversation between 2 people. So sure, the manager, you would be communicating your needs and your standards, but at the end of that time, it is up to that team member to actually make that happen by implementing their own particular structures and ways of doing things. So delegation should actually be a conversation. Now, the next 2, I think, are really very important, and I think I see so few of these conversations, but yet I think they're so important. So what are they? All right. One of the things that we need to be having more conversation, and I don't see this in local government anywhere near enough, and you may well be feeling that your boss isn't doing this to you, but this is called the visioning conversation. This is about explaining to people the outcome of what you're expecting so that people can paint a picture of what the ideal, what are the consequences of doing what I'm asking you to do. So talking about how it'll impact on the ratepayer, or talking about how it will impact on your colleagues in your team, or talk about how it will deal with rifts between local government. These conversations are about giving people a fuller picture or a context about what you expect. Now let me give you a very simple example. Let's say that you're working in the depot. No, we'll actually put it, I'll give you a commercial example because it just might make a bit more sense, but you'll get my point. Let's imagine that you've gone down to the production area, and it's a large production area, and you have asked somebody to sweep the floor. So you've walked up and you said, look, before you leave on your shift, would you mind sweeping the floor, please? So that's what you're asking. So you're kind of delegating, and it's all one way, and you just said it. Now, that employee is probably not going to be terribly excited about that request, of course, but they don't understand the context behind it. What about if you said to them, I'd like you to sweep the floor of the production area, please, before you go home from your shift. The reason I'm asking you is we've got a customer or a prospective customer coming in next tonight, and they want to look over the production area because they're wanting to invest a significant amount of their produce into this organisation, which will mean millions and millions of dollars of revenue and job security for all. I really just want to create a great impression. So when I'm asking you to sweep the floor, all it is about making the right impression when the person arrives. I think you'd find that if you did that, it would be certainly far more inspirational than it would be for you just to say, sweep the floor, please. So you're giving people a vision of what you want them to do. Another one is the encouraging conversation. Again, managers feel that it's not their role to encourage people. Look, you may not need encouragement. You might be a self-starter and all that sort of stuff. But look, and you might be saying, yes, but my boss doesn't encourage me. Well, put all that aside for a moment. At the end of the day, people need encouragement. And if you don't encourage your people, they're going to be performing at a suboptimal level. So encourage people, thank people, let them know that you appreciate the effort, and challenge some people gently and say, I know you can do this. I've seen you in action, and that's why I've got every confidence in your ability to pull this off. Absolutely. So the visioning conversation is important, and so is the encouraging conversation. Some managers think, oh, well, I won't do that because what will happen is they'll get a big head, or they'll drop the bundle because I'm encouraged. No, they won't. They'll redouble their efforts, actually. And they'll do that because they won't want to disappoint you the next time round, because you've set a marker in the sand by encouraging them. And by doing that, you have set a standard for them to uphold at every subsequent time. So how about more encouraging conversations? You can have one coming out of this broadcast immediately. Walk up to someone that's just done something exceptional in the last 48 hours and look them in the eye and thank them and let them know that you appreciate what they're doing and encourage them to do more of it. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at what happens. Two more things before we wind up. Try and get yourself out of looking at things through your own eyes, which is first position. Try and look at things through the other person's set of eyes. In other words, try and put yourself in their shoes. But there's an even more superior position to that, and that's third position. So not only can you see things from the point of view of the other person, you can also have what we call the helicopter view. In other words, you can see the big picture of what's actually occurring. So these three things are critically important. So the more you can be in third position, the better. the more you deal with things in first position, that is ineffective because you're not really putting yourself in the shoes of the other person. So just a micro skill to keep in mind. And as I said earlier, it's really important to get good at asking questions. Why, what, when, who, how, and which. All of the questions precipitate more than a yes or no under normal circumstances and can give you some great opportunity and tool for dialogue. All right, so folks, that's it for today. We've covered barriers. We've talked about the 5 conversations framework. I have shared with you 5 additional conversations. Guess what your homework is? Well, it is to organise regular get-togethers with your direct reports on a fortnightly basis if you don't already do it or you've dropped the ball on it, or monthly if you choose, and stick to it no matter what. So you can go out of this meeting that we're having today and start setting up regular two-way conversations fortnightly or monthly. What are you going to talk about in those meetings? I don't know, because there are things that it'll fill up. There'll be no problem about that. But the important thing is that you set a vehicle in place so that you can have these conversations. And I'll guess what? If you're looking at getting the best out of people, that is precisely the way to do it, is to have more regular conversations. So, if you want to do something constructive on the Friday afternoon, we're all tired from the week, then set up a system where you're going to instigate or recommence having your regular conversations. And if, of course, you've got them in place, fantastic. Commit to keeping them, of course. And that is very, very important. So that's the homework, folks. And, these programs are only as good as the homework that you do or not do, as it might be. So I'm encouraging you to have regular conversations with your people. And the very last slide, well, you've been a quiet bunch today. I haven't had many questions. We had a few interesting comments, but we have got time for one or two. If you've got a quick question, you can type it in. But look, let's just understand where we've been and where we're going. We looked at the ingredients of feedback in Module 1. I'm hoping you're still doing that and haven't dropped the ball on that. We looked at influencing capabilities in Module 2, and I asked you to complete the influencing capabilities profile to give you a handle on how you like to deal with influence. Today, we've really been talking about optimizing team performance, which really amounts to having more useful, meaningful, and diverse conversations that are people-focused. Next time we meet, we're looking at getting the very best out of people, so we'll continue this theme a bit more, understanding people and their personality, and facilitating effective meetings. So, folks, thank you. If you can think of other things that you want to talk to me about, I'm always available on email. That's part of the deal. This afternoon, you will receive an email from me, and in that, keep your eyes peeled for that. In that email, you'll receive the slides, and you'll receive a video recording, which you might like to go over again. So you'll get that from me this afternoon. So thank you, folks. Thank you for your involvement, and I wish you all the very best. And have a fantastic weekend. Thank you.